biodiversity, whether it is the material footprint of humanity, whether it is the way in which we also relate human well-being and human progress to that inextricable dependence that we have on the planet, its natural resources, the environmental conditions under which we live. And the notion of the Anthropocene, which is still a term that, you know, when we did a survey on the streets of New York, produced some very funny reactions. Obviously, many people are not familiar with the term, but you will all recall that the Holocene has been the geological age in which we have lived now for rather a long time. And the term Anthropocene was really one that emerged just in the last few years in trying to capture a fascinating but also to some extent a very worrying phenomenon, that the collective impact of humanity on our planet is now geologically traceable. And therefore the idea of naming our age, which could last hundreds or thousands of years, is to recognize that humans really have become the dominant species on this planet, and with it they are changing the atmosphere, the biosphere, and really life on planet Earth. Now, to some, that notion may be a dystopian one, and clearly we have many reasons to be concerned about the footprint of humanity on our planet. But it is at the same time also a way of looking at our ability to exercise choices. We live in an age with more technology, with more science, with more economic resources at our disposal than at any point in human history. And that means we also have the ability to choose different paths. And so the narrative, the metaphor of an age such as the Anthropocene becomes as much one of realizing quite how serious a set of parameters we're operating in, as it is also liberating us to think about very different choices about the future. Choices as informed, mature, and responsible societies, and also generations, because the consequences of decisions today in terms of developmental pathways that we choose clearly will have consequences for generations to come. And nowhere is this more drastically illustrated than in the context of climate change. But there is another dimension to this, which is inequality. And in the 2019 Human Development Report, we had focused on inequality as also being inextricably linked to climate change. It affects people differently. Our capacities to protect ourselves from climate change differ, and yet we are bound together by a planetary change phenomenon. So in thinking about the implications of this for the future of development, we really wanted to signal that we are looking at a next frontier of development choices, and nowhere is this more directly experienceable than in the context of this pandemic. Now, a second major innovation that we brought with this year's Human Development Report that Pedro Conceicao, who is the director of the Human Development Report Office, will speak to a little bit later, is that long search for trying to link that which happens to our planet, which we often describe as environmental, with that which happens to us as humans. And the tradition, the origins of the Human Development Report are deeply rooted in an attempt to try, first of all, to measure human development as more than just a matter of per capita income or gross domestic product. Those were the driving origins of 30 years ago, UNDP introducing the Human Development Report and the index, which included education and health as other parameters in which to better capture human development and progress. Now, here we are in the year 2020 when we wrote this report, and quite clearly that relationship between people and nature is fundamental to human development and human progress. So we introduced an experimental, what we call a planetary adjusted human development index, in which we added carbon emissions and material consumption for all the countries for which we could obtain data, and merge those into this planetary adjusted index as a way of better documenting how development pathways, choices, the footprints we are creating, but the well-being we are also generating can be better measured. And it is really a frontier in our own effort to try and give people, countries, nations across the world a new way of both measuring their own progress and also being able to understand how they fit into that picture of a community of nations. And the harsh truth is, when you apply these broadened indices, what we find is that there is virtually no country at the moment in that bottom right-hand box of a graph that measures environmental impact and human progress, meaning low environmental impact and high human progress. But clearly countries have made very different choices, have had the opportunity to choose different pathways, and therefore it is very interesting what kind of picture emerges. I end by just saying, and Pedro will in a moment elaborate on this, this report is not a formula for development. It is really trying to change the lens with which we look at our moment in time, and particularly on how we look at the enormously important choices we need to make in the coming years. And there are three areas which we highlighted as being fundamental also from the study of the past. One is social norms. It is critical in our societies to develop the kinds of norms that view our responsibility in terms of actions today in the consequences that it will have on future generations, and how we establish shared social norms that allow us to act collectively, whether in our family, in our community, in a city, or indeed in a nation and the community of nations. Because some of the issues we are dealing with simply cannot be addressed beyond or just within the remit of an individual or even a nation state. Secondly, incentives. We must move to recognizing that our economy right now, through its tax systems, through the structural inequality, through the terms of trade, through our taxation systems, is sending signals that are in contradiction to the kind of changes that we're actually needing to undertake. So a understanding of how incentive structures can enable people to act in response to our knowledge and awareness of what needs to change is critical. And therefore, this is a key area in which we need to move forward much more systematically and much more deliberately. And thirdly, nature-based solutions. Development in the 21st century is not about divorcing humanity from the vagaries of nature, as we might have said 200 years ago when floods or droughts or diseases were essentially a view where technology and science would separate us from these risks. Our development, our economies, our societies must invest in nature-based solutions in order to allow human development to progress. I'll stop here, Femi, but these are some highlights of how we have tried to frame truly a report that brings new analytical and empirical data together with a next frontier conversation that I think we can all sense. And to launch this today with our colleagues from the European Commission is particularly gratifying because we have had a very close dialogue with many of our partners in Europe. We are observing with great interest some of the big policy signals and programs that the European Union is establishing for its own transformation, but also in its engagement with the rest of the world. This is the practical end of the next frontier, and it is partnership, it is cooperation, it is a sense of common purpose that ultimately will unite us or divide us in this search for human development and the Anthropocene. Thank you so much.
Administrator Stein, I have been talking to a number of your team at the Human Development Report Office, and they say every other day there's an event or there's a discussion about the Human Development Report 2020. So there's obviously interest in the report, a lot of interest. But how do you decide if the report is successful? Is it that interest alone, or is there more that has to happen to make it a successful 30th anniversary report?
You know, the Human Development Report has always had a little bit more of a freedom to think forward, to provide thought leadership. What brings about change in our societies in the way we act and decide things, obviously has many, many different drivers. But thought leadership, to give expression to a moment in time, but also to provide a perspective on how to move forward, that is part of what the United Nations Development Programme sets out to bring to many, many different realities. Let us also remember, if you are currently sitting in Yemen, the resonance of a Human Development Report is going to be very different than if you are a citizen of the United States or Japan or Argentina. So I think measuring the impact of the Human Development Report can first of all be done by looking at the level of interest in it. And it still is, in its 30-year evolution, it has become the most downloaded development report of a global nature, of any institution or indeed of that kind. So I think the interest is significant. And just in the weeks following the launch, we have had so many requests for introducing this report into national discussions in, for example, the international financial institutions, the World Bank, including its executive directors, its board, but also with communities. And I think for us, the first yardstick is, does the report capture a sense of both discomfort with where we are and a sense of orientation that is needed? And clearly here, that response is there. How, in many millions of decisions across the world, this report will land in national discussions, maybe at the level of a city, or indeed a business leader or the financial markets, that is part of our effort now in socializing this report. But at the end of the day, it's not a recipe. It is a framework within which to evaluate one's own position, one's own scope for acting, and above all, perhaps a template in which conversations can happen between many different actors, because it is alignment in both recognizing reality and alignment in the way forward that a report like this can help to generate and to catalyze. So that's where we are.
Administrator Steiner will be part of our panel of leaders in just a moment. But first, I want to say hello to Jutta Upalainen. Jutta Upalainen is the European Commissioner for International Partnerships. And Commissioner, I've been looking on your social media and you have a pinned tweet, which I love. It's so appropriate for today. It's a video. There's an increasing need for international partnerships. And you talk about multilateralism, how in this age of COVID-19 and so many challenges, we need to work together as partners. And here you are demonstrating that in this very event. It is so nice to see you. Welcome. Looking forward to hearing your welcome.
Thank you, Femi. I'm very delighted to be here today. And dear Achim, dear colleagues and friends, let me first comment Achim Steiner and the UNDP for your 2020 Human Development Report. And congratulations on reaching your 30th anniversary. It's a tribute to your hard work that the annual reports and the Human Development Index itself have become an important part of our landscape. I have to admit that when I was a member of the Finnish Parliament, almost 17 years, the report I read every year was especially Human Development Report. So I know that it's a very, very useful, very, very interesting report and really brings food for thought also for the decision makers. This year or last year report is a groundbreaking and insightful piece of work. So my heartfelt thanks to you and your team, Achim. That we are even discussing this new geological era, the Anthropocene, the new word and term also to me, that we are now in a time when mankind shapes the whole planet and not the other way around, is mind-boggling. Your proposal this year to refine the Human Development Index to take account of both our carbon dioxide emissions and our material footprint is important and right. Looking at how this affects the performance of countries, particularly wealthier countries, in the index is sobering. And the report really speaks for itself. What it has to say is very clear. Either we take decisive action on the environmental crisis, or human development will falter and we will continue to face crisis after crisis. So COVID-19 pandemic won't be the last crisis we face. Europe understands the gravity of the situation, and our Green Deal aims to make nature the engine of a sustainable growth model. And it is a plan for true recovery. It reconciles planet and economy to accelerate the transition towards a circular, low carbon and sustainable future that leaves no one behind. Fundamentally, it is an agenda closely intertwined with our fight to tackle inequalities, to create sustainable growth and jobs, and also bridge the digital divide. So while we aspire the great things for Europe, we are conscious that it is only through close cooperation with international partners that we will redesign our path to progress. And this, of course, includes partners like the UNDP. We have deeply valued our cooperation and on the implementation of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, and more recently on mitigating the impact of the pandemic in partner countries. Our work on other initiatives like your climate promise, our shared biodiversity work and financing for development with its focus on integrated national financing frameworks, they all show how much we can achieve leveraging respective resources and strengths. So let me briefly set out how we can take this partnership even further. Firstly, the EU wants to build our future cooperation and strategic engagement with the UNDP more closely around EU priorities, like the Green Deal, which of course themselves stem and align with core principles and agendas of the UN system, such as the 2030 Agenda or Paris Agreement. We need also a clear understanding and a joint strategy of what we want to achieve. Secondly, the EU's current programming process offers a unique opportunity to translate mutual EU-UN priorities into operational work at the country level. And we hope to work closely with the UN on Team Europe initiatives going forward. Thirdly, the EU wants to be the United Nations' best ally in the multilateral system. Just a couple of weeks ago, the EU took an important step to renew our approach to multilateralism to ensure it can face 21st century challenges in a post-pandemic world. And to that end, we are determined to uphold what works, reform what needs to change, and extend global governance to new areas. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, the UNDP's Human Development Report does not shy away from hard truths. Yet the message is hopeful because the power to reimagine and rebuild our world, to choose justice and sustainability is within humanity's grasp. So we just have to seize it. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to contribute this marvelous event today.
Thank you, Commissioner. But before you go, you have a very impressive portfolio of partnerships. The United Nations Development Programme is in there, but is it in your top 5, your top 10, your top 15? Where is it in terms of importance?
Well, I have to say that I'm a politician, and for the politician, it's always very difficult to rank, partners or voters or stakeholders. But I have to say that UNDP is definitely one of the oldest and closest partners for the EU. And I think one reason for that also, of course, in general, we are very committed to multilateral system. And as I explained, we also just, adopted a new communication on multilateralism. And of course, UNDP, like the whole UN family, is very in the heart of the multilateral system. But I think that why the UNDP is special for us as a European Union is also that I'm responsible for 126 countries around the world, and we know that also the UNDP has a very broad network around the world. So they are really present at the country level. And as I explained, for instance, now when we are programming, when we are, planning the new programs and allocating our funding to different regions and countries and different policy areas, we need to have partners at a country level to work with. And I think that that makes the UNDP so important to us, because they are really at the country level, they are present there, and they also provide us a very, very valuable and important information of that specific country.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your very diplomatic answer. Appreciate you. So, viewers, now that you are officially welcomed, let me tell you how you can share this conversation around the world using the hashtag HDR2020, and then also jumping into the question little box that you see on your dashboard, on your screen. You can put your comments, your questions there for all the way through our conversation. I will do my best to bring your thoughts into our conversation today. Now, the director of the Human Development Report Office is Pedro Conceicao. Pedro, hello, it's great to see you. Pedro is going to give us some of the key messages, the key themes of the Human Development Report 2020. Spoiler alert is about to come. But Pedro, I'm just wondering about you and your team as they were getting ready for this very significant anniversary. Did you think, okay, this one has to be special? This report has to be different. How did you approach it?
Thank you, Femi. Well, it was the 30th anniversary edition of the Human Development Report, but it was also a year in which we were living through COVID-19. So very often we asked ourselves the question of whether the most important thing that the team should be doing was writing a report or supporting the UNDP response to COVID-19. And we actually invested a lot of time in supporting the UNDP response to COVID-19. But I think that living through COVID-19 also helped us to understand that the core human development idea that people, rather than expanding incomes, should be at the center of development, became more perhaps in sharp relief. And it also showed the importance, as we went through the COVID-19 experience, the importance of equity, which lies at the core of the human development approach across several dimensions, from access to digital technologies to access to the COVID-19 vaccines. And we also saw how quickly people were changing their behavior, making different choices when it came to things like using masks, as well as investing in new vaccines, which developed, a number of them were developed in less than a year. So the commissioner alluded to this very important idea of the human development concept, which is that people have agency. So I think that these three aspects, putting people at the center, focusing on equity and empowering people to make different choices, show that human development report that Mahbub Haq, or concept that Mahbub Haq introduced more than 30 years ago, remain as relevant as ever. And so we hope that with our report, we make good on the promise of keeping this concept alive.
If you Google Human Development Report 2020, you will find it online. But if you're with us online right now, Pedro is going to share with you some key findings. Pedro, please go ahead.
I think I can be brief, Femi, because Commissioner Pilainen and our administrator have already set up the context so well. So you'll hear me reiterate some of the points that our administrator, Achim Steiner, has already made. But I want to focus on three key messages. The first key message is that the 2020 Human Development Report is really an invitation to look at challenges such as COVID-19 and the climate emergency as reflections of this unprecedented moment in human history, but also in the history of our planet that Achim spoke about. So it's an invitation to not look at these as separate problems, and to look at this unprecedented moment because of the pressures that we're putting on the planet, which are driving changes that are dangerous for people, for us, and also for all life on our planet. It's a time which the United Nations Secretary General has characterized as humanity waging a war on nature. The second key message of the report is that we are not only facing a new type of risks, but they are actually superimposed onto a world with large and often growing inequalities, which Achim has already emphasized. And they are actually exacerbated by these risks. So if we look at COVID-19, we know that economic impact has been worse for women than men. The United Nations Secretary General today is speaking about COVID-19, the crisis COVID-19, the impact having the face of a woman. And this is in part because women are overrepresented in some of the sectors that have been more affected, but also perhaps more concerning, social norms related to the expectation of the role of women in homework or childcare are reasserting themselves, leading many women to pull back from the labor force. So you see on this slide that we include in the report that we've seen drops of as much as 10 percentage points in the labor force participation rate of women in several countries. It's the big drop that you see in the lines. And this represents a reversal of progress that has taken decades to achieve. But actually, this pattern notes more broadly. You see on the left-hand side that countries that face more ecological threats, droughts, floods, storms, are also those where gender inequality is higher. And on the graph on the right of this slide shows that if we consider inequality in human development more broadly, the story is very much the same. Now, inequalities are also linked to gaps in consumption and in power between those that over-extract and over-pollute and those bearing the consequences. And in the report, we show that by the end of this century, the poorest countries in the world, which are represented by the red lines on this graph, who have contributed the least to climate change, could actually experience up to 100 days more of extreme temperature, while rich countries, on the right hand side of this chart, could actually experience 18 days less. But these 100 days could be actually cut in half by getting closer to meeting the aspirations of the Paris Agreement on climate change, as you can see in the blue lines. So what happens going forward is not inevitable, but depends on choices. And this brings me to the third and last key message that I wanted to emphasize. As I mentioned earlier, human development is not only about people's well-being, it's also about seeing people as agents, not patients, to use a phrase by Amartya Sen. So seeing people as agents of change calls for giving them conditions to make different choices. So in the 2020 HDR, we supplemented Human Development Index with a new index of planetary pressures that combines indicators of material footprint per person and carbon dioxide per capita. So you heard our administrator, Achim Steiner, speak of a graph plotting the Human Development Index on the horizontal axis and this planetary pressures index on the vertical axis. So this is the graph that you see on the slide. And the dots represent countries, the position of countries on these two indicators. And the aspirational space at the bottom right-hand corner is currently empty. So this aspirational space of high human development and low planetary pressure is currently not occupied by any country. So to take us there, the report lays out three mechanisms to encourage people to make different choices. The first is, as Achim alluded to, harnessing social norms. Now, much of the analysis that we hear is premised on the idea that each person is an island making rational calculations on how to behave. But actually, humans are an ultra-social species, and the key predictor of people's behavior is what others around them do and expect them to do. So I already mentioned how behavior related to social norms, when I addressed your first question, Femi, have changed so quickly and so dramatically. So the report argues that we must harness social norms that give greater weight to easing planetary pressures. And an instrument to do so that we emphasize in the report has to do with the role of education. Education here broadly understood as important to enhance both a sense of stewardship for nature, as well as the critical thinking that's essential for reasoned public and individual deliberation. Second, in our market economies, prices, regulation can be used to shift economic incentives. Carbon prices and the removal of fossil fuel subsidies are examples. And I think Europe here is a leader on many of these initiatives. But the report emphasizes also the importance of incentives and investments in research, technology, and innovation. Not only to encourage the diffusion of technologies that can already make a difference, but more importantly, to enable a spirit of continuous innovation and learning to continue forward. So investments in science and technology, because any specific technological fix may bring about unintended consequences. And we've seen that again and again over the course of history. It also looks at changes in financial markets. We know that climate change will result in economic and financial losses, not only to businesses, but also to families, to households. For instance, through falling value of homes in flood-prone areas. Governments also can suffer losses. So financial regulators are requiring more climate risk assessment, and even central banks are incorporating climate risks in their macroprudential oversight of the financial system. And again, here, Europe here is taking a leading role. And the third mechanism of change invites us to look at nature not as a constraint, but as a potential opportunity in advancing human development by protecting and restoring ecosystems. Ahim often speaks of the ecological infrastructure upon which ultimately not only opportunities but our lives depend upon. Examples here include the blue economy, for instance, investing in the restoration of ocean ecosystems, which can provide also outstanding economic opportunities. So let me conclude by coming back to the central theme of inequalities, or what we call in the report social imbalances, because these inequalities is often what stands in the way of having these mechanisms of change that I just described acted upon. For example, we document in the report that the contribution of indigenous peoples to managing forests as carbon sinks is roughly equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions of the top 1% of the global income distribution, both on per person basis. And these are the indigenous peoples that are very often the people that are marginalized and persecuted around the world. So these imbalances are putting people and planet on a collision course, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can make different choices, and our aspiration is that with the 2020 HDR, we'll help to provide some signposts on how to continue advancing human development while easing planetary pressures to move us towards meeting the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Pedro Conceicao is the director of the UNDP's Human Development Report Office.
Throughout time, the planet has shaped all life.
The planet has shaped all life.
The planet has shaped all life.
But now, in the era of the human, we are shaping the planet.
And truthfully, we are not doing a good job at it yet. Our actions are putting a lot of pressure on the world. Just look at 2020 with COVID-19, extreme weather, and rampant wildfires. People have created this mess, but we can fix it.
Empowered people can become agents of their own destiny. The world may seem stuck in its own ways, but we can take actions to create a new normal, whether that's expanding the role of women in society or using cleaner energy.
In too many countries, fossil fuels remain the primary source of energy. But clean alternatives like solar power will help reduce our carbon emissions. These alternatives need to be made accessible and affordable without using too much of other finite resources.
And we must learn to harness the power of nature at the same time as we protect its beauty and wonder. Moving to protect, sustainably manage and restore ecosystems in a way that promotes well-being.
Too often, the decisions of a few people or countries hurt the most vulnerable people across the world. For all of us to flourish now and into the future, we must understand that we are all connected. The choices you make impact the whole world around you.
Shaping the planet means
taking bold steps.
Bold steps for humans to survive and thrive in this new era.
If we are going to change the world,
we need you.
We need you.
We need you, our global leaders, to take bold action now.
So let's go deeper with some global leaders. This is the bit where you get to be part of the conversation as well. I'm going to say hello, welcome, magnificent panel. I will say hello to each of the panel members. They will introduce themselves very briefly so you know who they are and what they do. Ambassador, welcome. Tell our audience watching who you are and exactly what you do.
My name is Berta Cossa, and I am ambassador of Mozambique to Benelux and representative of, to the European Union.
Good to have you. Director General Kunz, nice to see you. Introduce yourself to those people who are not in Europe right now and who do not know what you do and who you are. Go ahead. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Femi. My name is Koen Doens. I'm the Director General for International Partnerships, which means that under the authority of Commissioner Urpilainen, whom you've just heard, I'm in charge of the European Union's development policy and its implementation, with staff in about 120 delegations worldwide.
Nice to have you, Director General Petitione. So nice to see you. One of the most important jobs right now for this era. No pressure. Introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are, what you do.
Thank you, Femi. No pressure at all. My name is Mauro Petriccione. I run the department in European Union that runs after climate policy. We try and devise policies, propose them, implement them, and we work under the authority of the Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans.
So good to see you. And the final panelist is Achim Steiner. He is the administrator of the UNDP. He needs no introduction. I'm not going to give him one. Achim, good to have you in the conversation. Let us start, Ambassador, with you, because when we were planning this conversation, and I asked every single panelist, what is important to you? You didn't even pause. You said gender. Immediately, women and girls, so important. Today's International Women's Day. What are you extracting from the Human Development Report 2020 that connects with this passion of yours, this mission of yours to help women and girls?
Yes, thank you, Femi, and good afternoon to the members of the panel. And I thank the UNDP for inviting me to be part of this very timely conversation that we are having today in a very special day. And allow me to pay tribute to women all around the world, particularly the pioneers who paved the way so women like myself could get education and have a voice. Yes, today is a very special day, and you are touching upon on the issue of women and development. And the report tells us that one of the features of human development is inequality. And we know that women for so many years and all around the world have been the ones who have suffered the most because of inequality. And I think that throughout the whole report, the UNDP is trying to bring to our attention that inclusiveness is very important when we discuss human development. And I would say that it's very important that women should be given opportunity to engage from the early stage in all the discussions and all the initiatives that will affect them as well as their communities. And so that's why I felt that inclusiveness was very important part of it, and it touched upon because we need to continue to engage and to give space for women to participate in the whole processes that we are involved with.
Ambassador, how did you see that, though, in the context of Mozambique, which is your home country? When you were reading the Human Development Report, what images, what ideas were coming to you from your home country?
The main ideas were that, and even Pedro Conceicao touched upon on the communities and the experiences that we need to look at them. And I do believe that it's important that we connect to our communities. In Mozambique, for example, we are having now different projects being run by women, and they are making a difference in the development and changing the quality of life of those communities. And those projects, they are helping women to develop, and also most importantly, they are showing that when women are given the opportunity and the space, they can change. We have projects, for example, related to development and sustainability, which are taking place in Mozambique, particularly in Gorongosa, where we are having the development of nature and preservation of wildlife, but at the same time, giving opportunity to our communities to engage, to participate, and also to contribute to the changing of their own lives.
Let me just bring in Koen, because when I looked at the Human Development Report 2020, there was a word that jumped out at me. I'm not going to lie. Now, because the global launch was back in December, I know this word intimately, but I didn't know at the time. And this was something that, Koen, when you saw this word, you loved it, you embraced it, it inspired you. I'm going to allow you to say it and then tell us why you're inspired by it. Go ahead.
Thanks, Femi. Well, you've all heard it already. It's Anthropocene. It's got nothing to do with the fact that I'm a classicist, so I studied the ancient Greek language, so anthropos immediately hits. No, but I think it's a brilliant word, and the fact that they've chosen this, even if it's not yet officially approved, I think, if I'm not mistaken, as a subdivision of our geological time, I think this report really nails it. And I liked it because it made me think of basically two things, if you allow me. First of all, I don't know if you remember, but at the end of the previous century, 1999, there was a famous movie, The Matrix, in which Agent Smith lambasted humankind, and he said, actually, you can't be mammals, because mammals instinctively develop kind of a natural equilibrium with their environment, whereas humans, you don't. You plunder. You plunder your own resources, and when they're finished, you move to another era. And he says, and that's where he accuses mankind and makes this very awkward comparison with men being like viruses. And I think actually that the brutality of that point in the movie actually is very interesting in today and in light of what we're discussing here, because it poses a real challenge for all of us, which is, are we capable indeed of rallying behind the cause that we need to follow if we want to restore that kind of equilibrium between ourselves and the planet that we are losing. And in simple policy terms, it basically means, are we ready to implement indeed at least, and we should go beyond, the commitments we've all taken when we signed up to the Paris Agreement? And secondly, are we ready later this year in Kunming to take similarly strong commitments when it comes to biodiversity? And that leads me to the second point. A few days ago, or last week, there were articles in the press about the fact that they found in Mexico, in Yucatan, geologists found some, let's say, asteroid dust inside the famous Chicxulub impact crater, which is a place where 66 million years ago this meteor impacted Earth, creating a huge impact which ultimately led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. And it made me think of this, because ultimately what we're doing now, mankind is potentially becoming its own meteor. We are maybe, if we don't get things right, at the source of our own potential extinction. And I think that this, combined with what the report so clearly says, which is that the immediate impact is already one of huge inequality, is really a wake-up call, if ever there has been one. And so I love, and captured in this notion, in this word of Anthropocene, I find it brilliant.
I never expected to hear the Matrix mentioned in a conversation about the Human Development Report 2020. Congratulations to you. The other thing is, you asked the question, and I always love to throw the question back. Are we ready, Koen?
Well, I'm not sure, because this goes to the heart, I think, of how we are as well as human beings, and ultimately how our, at least, democracies are organized. So it's about finding the right balance between what we see as a long-term challenge and then being able to act today, to do today what is needed to address that long-term threat. I mean, I sometimes think about it as like our New Year's resolutions. Every year on the 1st of January, we look at our lives and we see, oh, there's a number of things that I really need to adjust, because if not, in the long term, it's going to go wrong. And if you then look back at the end of the year, how many of those New Year's resolutions you've actually acted upon, it's actually, at least in my case, very disappointing every year. And it captures in a very personal way, I think, the real challenge we are facing, which is we're all aware and convinced of the big problem we have, but we seem to be struggling to do today what is needed to save us tomorrow. So am I optimistic? I mean, I'm not in the business of optimism or pessimism. I just think that we must muster the strength to get this done. And how to do that, my colleague Mauro Petriccione will tell us how.
It's so funny. It's like you described the climate crisis perfectly. So I am not even going to do that slinky link to Mauro. Mauro, go ahead. Because one of the things that Human Development Report does, it points out the challenges, but also some ideas and themes, and how do we tackle them in terms of development and progressing human development. What did you see in the report that gave you some hope or some concern? What were your thoughts? Go ahead.
Thank you, Femi. Thank you, and Koen, for putting me on the spot. What did I see in that report? Opportunity. Behind any challenge, there is an opportunity. Are capable of the worst and the best. And we've seen that more than once in our history, in our own lifetime. How much are we seeing both? I believe that we are now ready to stop doing the worst, which we have been doing for a long time. We created this mess. We've powered our growth, our society, our intelligence with things which in the end are poisoning us. Not the first time, but the scale at which we are doing this is unprecedented. Well, I think we have an opportunity to redeem ourselves. I think we have an opportunity to change at one condition, that we don't do this in a way that leaves some of us behind. This is an opportunity. If we can make it a change for everybody, if this does not become a policy of sacrifice, we're killing the planet, let's save it, let's stop to do this, let's stop to do that, it's too expensive to do this, it's too expensive to do that. How are you going to say to people around the world who have no access to electricity, sorry, you shouldn't have electricity because more fossil fuels are going to kill the planet? We have to find a positive answer to this. We have to say, yes, we are going to bring you power. We're going to bring you electricity. We're going to bring a better standard of living, and we're going to do it cleanly. And we can. The answer is, if you look around, we've built a policy in Europe that we're very proud of because it's a conservative one. We're not waiting for the next miracle. We're not waiting for the great source of energy that will move our cars and heat our houses cleanly and cheaply. We can do it with what we have. We don't have to wait for miracles. The miracle is rolling up our sleeves and working together and bringing the same mentality, the same attitude everywhere. Until not long ago, I used to despair of my fellow Europeans. I found Europe depressing and depressed. We fear losing what we have. In the past few years, this continent is exploding. 93% of Europeans think this is a real problem, but also think we can actually help fix it. And just, now the virus stops them. But we've seen for months and months our young generation on the street with a very constructive message, but a very stark one. Fix this problem because it will be too late by the time it's our turn to replace you. So I think whenever I see a long list of challenges, I've learned from my team, the first thing you do is say, right, skip the bit, this is the problem. Go straight to the point, where is the solution? And lo and behold, if you look around, you do find solutions. But the effort is gigantic, and it adds to the efforts that we know. The ambassador was talking about gender, and so were you. We can't fix our climate and forget about inequality, forget about discrimination, forget about access to opportunities. But change offers opportunities. Change is the time when you can tell people, stop saying that we can't, stop saying we can't afford it, stop saying we've always done it like this, why change?
Koen, I do believe you're making notes. Would you share those notes with us?
Can you hear me? No, I was just writing. I was just writing down what Mauro was saying, or a few thoughts about what Mauro was saying, because I think that's exactly it. It is about getting this kind of emotional rallying right. The point he made about how we engage with people in our partner countries who are already actually doing so much, and I think it's a brilliant point also in the report, is to point out how actually a number of people, indigenous people, are making a crucial contribution to the big challenge that we have ahead, but it is not recognized, it is not valued, and at the same time, they are being hit by the huge impact. And so some of the aspects of what Mauro said is how can we personalize, emotionalize this more, integrate this more in our approach, and I think that's very, very valuable. That's what I was writing down.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Akin, we have this question in from Isidore Agbuku, and Isidore is watching right now. What do you think will be the geopolitical consequences of the Anthropocene? Akin?
Well, left unaddressed, I think it will amplify, exacerbate inequality, it will erode sustainability, and it will ultimately drive us into groups of actors that are angry at one another, because that is the consequence of what we are seeing play out at national level, where governments are not acting, where problems become more serious. And I think that in part also explains the political polarization we see emerging across the world in the last few years. And I wanted to refer briefly to your question to Kohn and his answer, are we ready? Well, our systems are suffering from inertia. Vested interests are obviously doing well in a status quo. But look around us. Our children are going out of school now at the age of 13, 14, 15 onto the streets to say, what are you doing? I mean, we are ready to act. We have seen in, the years before the pandemic hit us in 2020, people stepping out into the streets all over the world because inequality, unfairness, injustice were beginning to make people feel that the system is not delivering. So are we ready for change? Oh, absolutely. Are we struggling with this problem between where people see the contradictions and where, let's say, those, and I count myself as part of it, those of us who have the possibility to offer leadership are either not acting or are being prevented from acting. So to Isidore, I would say the Anthropocene is another way of describing our mutual interdependence. First of all, as peoples, as nations, as societies. So to what Mauro was saying, what Kuhn and the ambassador was also addressing, we are trying to act in synchronicity in a very unequal world, where first of all, historical responsibility for emissions is very different, where the economic opportunities to act in today's world are very different. That is why we need multilateralism, what Jutta was speaking to earlier on. The Commission's communication on multilateralism is as relevant to trying to address this issue as is the price of a kilowatt hour of solar energy. And I think it is in that coming together that we are going to see the world act more in unison. And just, this is not theory. Think back to December 2019 and now fast forward to February 2020. On climate change, we now have a level of ambition emerging and investments emerging that would have almost seemed surreal just 13, 14 months ago. The world is ready to act. Our systems, our economies, back to the Human Development Report, the incentives, the norms, those are variables that drive doing what can be done. And Mauro and others have spoken to it. When we had a hole in the ozone layer, we didn't even have a solution for it. For the issue of climate change, decarbonizing our energy sector, decarbonizing our transport sector, we have the solutions. We just need to put them into action.
Panel, I am going to get you to stand by because I have a series of questions for you, and you can draw on your expertise, your geographical expertise, your thematic expertise to answer them. I'm going to ask you to be brief, to the point, so that we can get as many questions answered as possible. And some of them are coming via video from prominent members of the European Parliament who are champions of sustainable development. So their questions are going to be good. Let's start with video question number 1.
I would like to thank the UNDP for its initiative to introduce a new Human Development Index, which includes also the carbon footprint and the material consumption of a country. My question to the distinguished panel is, how does the other megatrend, digitalization, influence the relationship between people, keyword broken societies, and the relationship between people and nature? Does digitalization alienate us from each other and nature, or does it provide the desired solutions? And what about its increasing carbon and material footprint?
Let me start with Mauro, first of all. Does this worry you, the idea of the world becoming more tech savvy, more technology available to us? What is that doing to our growing carbon footprint? Mauro, you start. Mauro, go ahead. Can you hear me? Digitization, growing technology, the world becoming more connected.
Well,
what is that doing
digitalization, like
to our
every
carbon
technology,
footprint?
has two
Yeah,
sides.
go ahead.
We're moving digital. It's enormous. Our carbon footprint of our digital life is enormous. At the same time, without digitalization, we're not going to use the technologies we need to change. Take our renewables. The reason why we have more than 20% renewables in our energy mix in Europe is because we have smart grids. At the same time, if we let data centers get out of control, we'll waste what we have gained in terms of decarbonizing other sectors. I think we have to take something like digitalization and use it for what we want and not being used by it. But that's the same for any technology. Any technology can consume you if you let it run. If you use it, you can use it for things you want and not those you don't want. So I think digitalization is part of the picture, and it's not a surprise that we are going for a green transition, green and digital, and we're going to try and do it together, because if we do it separately, we end up contradicting each other and we end up losing something.
I'm really intrigued, Ambassador, from the view from the Global South, where digitization is a process that is not there yet, but you have incredible young entrepreneurs on the African continent who are doing their best to use leapfrog technology. In that progress, are you even thinking about a carbon footprint, or are these the luxuries of being in the global north that you're worrying about your carbon footprint, and you're not really worrying about it if you're in the global south? And also, you don't have a big one, Ambassador.
Yes, with regard to digitalization, I'll go back to something, because in the report it says rethinking human development is an open journey for all. Yes, the problem is we need to ensure that we all benefit from the advancements of science and technology. But we are so into just getting into the new technologies in a way that we are not moving in the same path. Maybe the direction, but not on the same path. And Femi, you mentioned that we are having a lot of young people in Africa just enjoying and benefiting from the new technologies and digitalization. But I believe that there is a problem there. We are just concentrating on the benefits of it, but to many of us, we embarked in digitalization, but we still need to be educated to understand digitalization and all implications of digitalization. Because we don't think about digitalization related to the emissions. Because, for example, in most countries in Africa, when you talk about carbon monoxide, we just think about pollution coming from cars, airplanes, mining factories, but we don't think about digitalization having other implications. So I think educating ourselves about the whole concept of digitalization and not just using it for our benefit, it's very important, and it's key from the beginning, educating us about that.
Kun, you're looking thoughtful. Share your thoughts.
Well, thanks. No, I think, you can always plead it both ways. And I think digitalization in itself is, of course, neither good or bad. It's a bit like a hammer. If you use it and you hit the nail, then it's very efficient. And if you use it and you hit your own thumb, then it hurts. And I think that the question is nice because it somehow links back to last year's UNDP report on precisely climate digitalization. and inequalities, which developed a number of these issues. When we look at the positive side of it, you've referred yourself to the enormous dynamism that you see in many African countries when it comes to the creative side of digitalization. But likewise, when you look at education, the quality of education, and how difficult it is to make sure in a number of, let's say, countries in the global south to make sure that they have access to quality education, digital offers huge opportunities. And I think that that's the kind of thing we absolutely need to embrace. Now, on the other hand, and that was also very clear in MEP Bentele's question and developed in last year's report, it's also a major potential engine for inequalities. And if we do not work, as the ambassador says, on skills, both for users and for entrepreneurs, but also at access at affordable prices, then ultimately this may become or will become an engine for further inequalities. And I would like to add just one dimension, which is one that is very dear to the EU's approach to it. It has to be human-centric. And that brings us to the whole regulatory environment linked to privacy, to data protection, and so on. We've seen some of those core issues that ultimately have as potential collateral damage, either by purpose or indirectly, also the undermining of a number of core values and fundamental freedoms. And so it's a very complex issue where we need to look at different angles if we want to master it or harness it in a way that is positive, hitting the nail, and not negative, hitting the thumb.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again for an excellent metaphor and analogy. Akim, I am going to play question number 2 from a sustainable development perspective from a European parliamentarian who is very prominent, and ask you to respond. Let's hear the question first of all.
In my view, the world faces two central challenges. First of all, climate change. This threatening catastrophe, if we cannot overcome. And secondly, and Corona pandemic has made that even more clear, inequalities. Only if we empower our societies, if we empower human beings to get rid of the negative spillovers and to detect the chances of tomorrow, we will have a happy life all over the globe. Stefan Löwen has made that completely clear, that these elements are the two decisive elements to bring progress about. So my question to you, what measures, what initiatives are needed? I'm asking also as the coordinator of our Socialists and Democrats Development Working Group in the European Parliament, what do you suggest in practical terms that we start tomorrow to solve our problems and to empower the people?
This is such a good question. Starting tomorrow. Stefan Löwen, by the way, of course, is the Prime Minister of Sweden. Starting tomorrow. Akim, actually, why don't we start today? Climate change mitigation, COVID-19 mitigation. I'm going to get you to be brief because I want everyone to do a starting tomorrow suggestion. Go ahead, Akim.
Well, not to be argumentative, but I would say we even started yesterday, because at the heart of what MEP Bullman is saying is a different DNA that has to guide the way we think about investing in development, where we actually focus our attention. I would say those two variables of the 21st century that are absolutely fundamental are equity and sustainability. They are the drivers of what can tear us apart or what can unify us as, now a family of soon 8 billion, 9 billion people who have to share this planet together. And that is where inequality and injustice, first of all, erode what you can call social capital or contract. And secondly, the impact in terms of people's opportunities to live and eat and breathe clean air is severely compromised by the way we have gone. So moving forward, I think we have to focus on the decarbonization pathway as one. But decarbonization is, on the one hand, about climate change, but it's about so many other things. So if you actually were to move transport systems onto an electric platform, you're not only dealing with, climate change in the sense of emissions in the atmosphere, you're reducing pollution levels, you are, improving children's health, you're creating new jobs, you are creating mobility concepts. This is where digitalization becomes part of it. We could transport the same number of people more quickly in our cities today if we actually used a digital and electronic combined platform than with a third of the vehicles. I mean, this has been calculated for Lisbon, for cities like London, because what we have ended up with is a transport system where people are basically stuck in traffic. It's polluting our lungs, and it's actually not helping the world move forward. And I think inequality is something that is not rocket science. It's a choice. I come back to the Human Development Report. It's about norms. How much inequality are we willing to tolerate for us to pay half of the cost for a price of petrol per liter? I mean, this is as simple as it gets. On sustainability, it is now investing in a different infrastructure, and Mauro and Koens have spoken to it, and Ambassador Cosa spoke about how these choices are already being made also in developing countries. So in a nutshell, I think we know that these are the two design variables. We have technologies, we have policies. Now it's about choices, choices, choices. And they are being articulated more clearly by the people on the street sometimes right now than by our institutions of government and governance and leadership in the economy. That's where the dissonance is right now.
Right. So I'm not sure for the European parliamentarian that you all answered the question, but I'm going to move on and allow the co-panelists to weigh in. You talked about the importance of the question and how we should have already been doing the work. Starting tomorrow for COVID-19 and for the climate crisis, Mauro, what should be done? I'll let you just do the climate crisis. Starting tomorrow, what should be done? Mauro, go ahead. There's a delay between myself and Mauro, but it's worth waiting for. Citizens' action. I don't think Mauro can hear us. I'm going to move on to Koen. Koen, you heard the question. What is your reaction? What is your response? Go ahead.
Two things, I think. Walk the talk and walk with others. Walk the
Sorry,
talk means that
I'm having some trouble with my connection.
There is, Mauro, I'll come back to you and we'll try and fix this for you behind the scenes. I'll get the behind the scenes team to work on that because there's a very long delay. You're not hearing the audio, so I will come right back to you. In the meantime, Koen, it was an urgent question. Yeah. It was like starting tomorrow. What should we do?
That's it.
COVID-19,
walk the talk. Walk the talk.
How can I
and walk
afford
with
it
others.
if I want to walk so tomorrow? I think
Mauro, we will come
have
back to you.
all of us.
Mauro, if I may I come back to you because Koen was right in the middle of his conversation and we've got a delay with yours. So I'm going to come to you very last so that we can get to you and so that I'm not interrupting Koen. So just give me 1 second. I will come back to you. Koen, third time lucky. Go ahead.
So walk the talk. And by that I mean that those who are the big emitters, and we know who they are, really now need to get their plans to go to zero carbon and need to implement them. And I think from that point of view, Europe does show the way. And Mauro will come back to this. And I think that others need to follow. And that's particularly important because right now, and that's the link with COVID-19, we are pumping huge amounts of money, stimulus in our economies to recover from COVID. And we absolutely have to make sure that we use that to put our economies on the right track towards low carbon. And brings me to the second point, which is walk also with others, because I think we need to mobilize much more massively to support our partners across the globe in two ways. First of all, on adaptation, because as this report again shows, the big impact of climate change, but also of COVID-19, the big impact is with partners, and we need to help them to adapt, because basically they have far less capacity to use fiscal stimulus or monetary tools, and so they need our support. You know that there are a couple of discussions ongoing. We need to do that. But secondly, as we do so, it's not just about adaptation. It's also about working with them, supporting them so that they can also embrace the twin transition of digitalization and of low carbon economy. If not, we will see that since the future is indeed embraced and defined by those twin transitions, that if we do not help partners to connect with those transitions now, we will create again for the future a prolonged inequality gap between those who have and who have done it and those who can't and haven't done it. And so I think that we need to embrace that now, immediately, especially because we are in a time frame when huge amounts of money are being mobilized to help us deal with COVID-19.
Thank you. Mauro, I appreciate your patience. Let us try to go back to you. It may help actually if you don't have your video on and we just see your picture and we hear you. That may mean that all of the energy is going into the audio rather than the audio and the picture. Let's see. You know the question. I'm not repeating it, but there's an urgency. Go ahead. All right. This is the issue with connectivity when we're doing live events. Mauro is not with us at the moment. I will bring him back if that is at all possible. There's one more video comment, and I'm going to get you to answer this one, Ambassador. And this is from a young lady who is concerned about, well, we'll find out what she's concerned about. Let's take a look.
Hello everybody, I am Yasmina Wiran, the founder of We Belong, and my question for you today is, knowing that the COVID-19 crisis has an enormous impact on young people, and particularly on inequalities and their access to education, what is your commitment to the millions young women and girls who today are out of school? Thank you so much.
Ambassador.
Thank you for this very important question. First of all, education should be in real terms a right to all, not a privilege to some. So in that context, we need to make sure that boys and girls will have the same treatment with regard to getting education. We need to help societies to give opportunities for girls to go to school, because in most of our societies, we look at girls like, well, they are raised to help their families and then to get married and then to have children. But when it comes to education, it's still a problem. So we need to also invest in, how can I put it, programs that can encourage communities to continue to have their children, their girls, to go to school. And we need to provide support to disadvantaged families so they can let girls go to school. We had a very good experience in our cooperation with one of our partners in Mozambique, that they were providing to the families a basket every month, so they could have food, and then the young girls would not have to work, and to help in terms of getting more revenue for the families. So I believe that experiences like that, it's what we need to do to encourage families to be able to send their girls to school. It's not because they don't want to, but it's because of the cultural and situations and the difficulties that they face. And I believe that we all have to bring more focus on initiatives like those ones that communities are taking in their different countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. All right, panelists, I'm going to ask you to do something very tricky, because you are able to do a deep dive into so many of these issues. particularly as the ones that have come out of the Human Development Report 2020. But I am going to give you only 30 seconds to respond to each of these questions. Are you standing by? I know you can do it because we've had some fantastic questions from our audience, and I want you to address as many as you can. Akim Jarvis Connell says, how can young people become involved in the Human Development Report 2020, the issues that come out of it? How do they get involved? What would you suggest?
Take it to the context in which you have the most opportunity to engage with others and do something. It may be in your school. I mean, you can take a Human Development Report and take some of its conclusions and look at the environment in which you currently operate. Sometimes for young people, it's that sense that they cannot do anything until they are in a job or in an elected office. No, everything begins in our families, in our schools, in our sports clubs or youth clubs, wherever we are. Take the ideas there, begin to discuss them and ask, what would we do differently as a result of this? Then connect. I mean, this is the beauty. If you have the opportunity, look where others in a similar situation are acting, and suddenly you have a movement. That's how things change. And I think people, you know, what has been for me the most inspiring part of, you know, the Fridays for Future is that young people who thought they had no voice on something like climate change, suddenly in their tens of thousands found their voice and started changing the politics of climate change. It happens, it works. So to all young people, don't listen to anybody who tells you you cannot do anything. And here is the entry point with a complex, but nevertheless inspiring report.
Partway through this program, you heard from UNDP Global Ambassadors, Goodwill Ambassadors, and the last comment on the video was, we need you, our global leaders, to take bold action now. Koen, as a closing thought, what would be the bold action that you, your colleagues, and you would recommend to other people that they take right now?
One bold action: make sure that later this year in Kunming on biodiversity, we adopt an agenda that is for biodiversity as ambitious as the Paris Agreement was or is for climate change. I think that we've seen how these kind of, let's say, multilateral building blocks, obligatory anchored treaties do provide subsequently for traction at the political level if subsequently citizens mobilize behind it. It's the perfect starting point where you can make the connection between big politics and the movement, the mobilization of masses, which Achim was just referring to.
Ambassador, I know that you did a deep dive into the Human Development Report 2020, and you picked out some inspirational quotes, things that jumped out at you, that really summed up why it was so important. Which of those quotes do you want to share with us?
I don't have...
No, Koens, not you. The ambassador. Ambassador has so many quotes. She's got good ones. You don't need to worry. The ambassador's got us. She's got us. What was it? What leapt out at you? Go ahead, ambassador. There were just some beautiful quotes. It was so well written. Pedro Conceicao's office, you did an extraordinary job. I think this is why you're doing discussions every other day, because people are really, it's resonating. Ambassador, I've given you some time to find the quote that you loved. Go ahead.
Yes, for me, I will go back to the key feature of human development has been inequality. And I do believe that if we want to move forward, we have to work together in terms of inclusiveness in the whole processes. The developed North and the developing countries, because we have to find a common path, because now we have the up North thinking about the new normal, but we in the South are still struggling to get to the normal. So that's why I think this issue of...
I'm going to quote the quote that you sent me, which I love. We are dependent on each other from birth. That was what you said, jumped out at you from the Human Development Report 2020. Achim Steiner is the UNDP Administrator. Achim, you have been in multiple conversations, discussions about the Human Development Report 2020. You don't seem to flag in your energy and your passion. Why is that?
Because I see every day more and more people both recognizing the necessity to act, feeling empowered to act, and I believe in hope. I think once you give up hope or you don't have any hope, you essentially, you paralyze others. So this report is a report about the hope of making decisions differently and how consequential that is. And I think it's a very powerful message, because development is about everyday choices we make. We often think development is just to do with developing countries. Ever since 2015, we have a Agenda 2030 that was agreed in the General Assembly. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. Every country, every society is making choices. Choices have consequences. This report is about the fact that you can make different choices, and that's why I feel absolutely energized. And I just want to say, I agree with you. There's a Shakespearean trait to our Human Development Report Office and Pedro's team. So it's another way of also inspiring people.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this conversation about the Human Development Report 2020, co-hosted by the UNDP and the European Commission. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.